Hey everyone, today we're going to learn how to make this little ad hoc camera stabilization system. It costs less than $10 and it's perfect for when you can't take a tripod with you or there's simply not enough room to be able to take one with you. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at how to make it. We're going to give you a parts list and then we're going to take you outside and we're going to take a look at how to use it, and then we're going to take a look at some results afterwards and see if it lives up to what I think it's going to do. So here are the parts we're going to need for this build. This is a 2-inch 1/4 by 20 bolt. I picked this one because it has a smooth shaft at the end of it and a slightly knurled grip, so it makes it easier to screw and unscrew from the bottom of the camera. Here we have 3 1/4 inch by 1.5 inch washers. We have the same thing in rubber. We have 2 1/4 inch by 1.25 inch or 1 inch, either one will be fine, rubber washers. We have 3 1/4 by 20 nuts. I picked square because they're a little bit easier for me to get my fingers on when I'm trying to tighten them underneath the camera. And this is an 18-foot length of 10-pound strength twine and nylon. It's number 18 rope. So that's all you're going to need for this. The total cost for all of these parts before tax was about $7.50. $2.50 of that was the rope, and I've still got 82 feet of rope left for something else. So here's the way we're going to build this. This is going to be designed to work, but also to be quiet, because a lot of the places where you need something like this are quiet, like museums. And you don't want to have something like this. When I put together the first mock-up, all of these washers were banging around, and I realized that that was going to make a lot of noise and draw attention to it, and I didn't want to do that, so I wanted to make it quiet. So the first thing we're going to do is put a rubber washer, one of the 1.25 or 1 inch ones, on the bottom. And next we're going to put a 1.5 inch metal washer. Next we're going to put another 1 inch or 1.25 inch rubber washer. And next a 1.5 inch metal washer. So this is what it should look like right now. Small rubber washer, large metal washer, small rubber washer, large metal washer. And when it's hanging on the bottom of your camera, if you don't have any rope in it, it's not going to make a lot of noise and draw attention to itself, which is good if you're in a museum. You also don't want to disturb all of the other patrons who are around. I actually did something wrong already. I'm going to take that metal washer off. We're going to take the rope at the midpoint of the rope. I bent it in half and then I just tied a knot with a loop. We're just going to put that right there. And then we put the metal washer on top of that. Okay. The next thing we do is we're going to take one of these square nuts, and these have a flat bottom and a curved top. So I'm going to put it with the flat bottom towards the washer. I'm going to screw this all the way down as far as it's going to go, because that's going to provide an upper limit for the washer so that it can't go any higher. And that'll help provide tension to keep the rope spooled up when it's not in use. Next I'm going to put the other 2 square nuts on the opposite direction. Now one thing, when you're not using this, when you have it stored, you can put these 2 on that way and then put the other square nut on, and that's good for storage because that way you won't lose any pieces. But that's not how it's going to go on the camera. So to put it on the camera, you put both of these nuts all the way down like this, and you could get away with 1 nut. I'm using 2 to make sure that it doesn't get loose, come loose from the camera. Then this goes on this way. You screw this part into the camera, and once you know where you want it to go on the camera, then you can tighten up these nuts to provide a nice firm grip so that this little gizmo will not come out of the bottom of the camera. But for the time being, I'm simply going to put these back on. And to put it on the camera, it goes metal base and then rubber washer, and the rubber washer touches the base of the camera, and that provides a slightly better grip against the camera than the metal will, which helps prevent the which gives you a little bit of better grip on the camera, so that you can also, you can use it as a bipod and you can also use it to hold. So it's a dual purpose camera stabilizer. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap the rope up around the opening here in the middle, which is the hardest part, honestly, of the build because it's kind of like a yo-yo. It's got no grip. And here it is with the rope all wrapped up. It took me about 10 seconds to wrap it. And one of the nice things about having this rubber washer on the bottom is it provides a little bit of grip to hold the loose end of the rope. Not a lot. So it would actually be a really good idea to have a Velcro cable tie that you can wrap around this when you're not using it to help make sure that rope doesn't come undone. You don't want to trip over it like you would your shoelaces, because then you'll fall flat on your camera and that's a catastrophe, and I don't want that to happen. So so this is good for temporary use, but I would not carry your camera around with the rope wrapped around the bottom washer like that. There's better and safer ways to do it. You could use a rubber band if you're not going to be taking it off for a long time, but it's a pain in the bum to undo the rubber band. So here we've got one of my cameras. And you can see the tripod bushing on the bottom, and that's what we're going to screw this into. And so the first step is to loosen this nut. So once we have the nut loosened, we're going to put the bottom nut all the way up against the top nut in the spool assembly. I'm going to grab the second nut. There we go. So you can probably see how this is starting to line up. Now, if you did this right, then there's going to be a little bit of play when you're done screwing it into the camera. As you can see, I'm actually grabbing the rope to do most of the turning. That's just an easier way to grab it than to finish it off. I'm using the nut or the bolt itself. Now there is a little bit of room here, so I'm going to tighten this, unloosen that. Man, these things really like to go in unison. There we go. That's nice and tight. That second one will keep it from becoming loose. And now it's very firmly affixed to your camera. The rubber will help protect you from getting tripod marks on the bottom of your camera, for those of you who are concerned about that. And it's pretty durable. So you can see you can hold your camera by just that. We're talking about fairly strong components here. If you have a huge lens on your camera, I really would not recommend doing that, because that is, after all, just a 1/4 inch thick bolt. And they do have the ability to shear in half. You've probably heard about the lens shutter speed reciprocity rule. And what that means is you don't want to use a shutter speed slower than the reciprocal millimeter distance of your lens. So for a 1/100 millimeter lens, you want to use a 1/100th shutter speed. For a 400 millimeter lens, a 1/400th, and so on. And under no circumstances do you want to use a shutter speed that's slower than 1/60th. So what we're going to do is take a look at this little gizmo that I just showed you how to build with a 77 millimeter Pentax FA limited lens. It's a low-end telephoto, super sharp. It is somewhere in the range of about 150 lines per millimeter at its sharpest, and somewhere in 130 in its dullest, which is still much better than most any lens out there. And so because it's such an unforgiving lens, it's going to give me a pretty good ability to determine how sharp or not sharp the images are. So I've gone to this abandoned, fairly unsafe part of town near me. It's actually not that unsafe, but it's very bright out here. So I've got two filters, an ND4 and an ND1000 filter. And so there's going to be a little bit of image quality loss. So what we're going to be looking for in this is an increase in motion blur or a decrease in motion blur, using it with image stabilization versus not with image stabilization. And not so much at image softness, because there's going to be a lot of softness introduced by filtering through two ND filters into the lens. And so I'm in the shadiest area I can be, both figuratively and literally. And let's get started. Off camera here, I'm going to take pictures of a couple of things that have sharp points on them, and I'm going to do it without the stabilizing gizmo at first. I'm going to use spot metering so that I meter the center of the image, which is what I'm going to be focusing on, the same way every single time. I'm going to be using, I don't normally use autofocus, but I'm going to for this. And I'm going to use single point autofocus for the center of the frame again, so that the center of the frame is what's most in focus. This is going to be done without shake reduction, then with shake reduction, and then I'm going to put on the gizmo and do the same thing without shake reduction and with shake reduction. A couple different ways to hold it. You can hold the camera like this. You can use this. You can also cradle this in the palm of your hand this way, and what that allows you to do is just have a slightly better grip on the camera this way. So one thing to bear in mind with this and with any stabilization system is that some of it is going to be dependent upon what type of image stabilization you have. So for instance, Canon and Nikon cameras have in-lens stabilization. Sony's and Pentax's have in-camera. And what that means is that with my Pentax here, the sensor is what physically moves around to compensate for stabilization, not quite as much as I'm demonstrating. With the Canons and Nikons, it's the lens elements that physically move around. So with this system, if you have a Sony or a Pentax, you'll see better results than if you have a Canon or a Nikon. You'll still see better results with a Canon or a Nikon than hand holding. But the reason that the in-camera stabilization works a little bit better is, let's say here is your camera, here's your film plane, and here's your lens. So when you're holding your camera, your pivot point with your hands, because you're holding the camera like this, your camera's mostly going to be moving around like this. So as you can see, in the lens, there's a much greater range of motion than in the camera back here, with just the way that you're holding it. And so the stabilization in the camera has to do less work to compensate for motion than it does when it's in the lens. We're back at the computer here, and what I've done is I've pulled up 4 images, and these are the 4 images taken at f1.8. So no shake reduction up here, use of no bipod with shake reduction, no shake reduction with the bipod, and shake reduction with the bipod. And the bipod is, of course, the rope bipod. So here at f1.8, everything's pretty soft. Over here, this is softness due to the distance from focal point, not because of motion blur. But, so that's f1.8. The next 4 here are f2.8, and still a little bit of softness due to motion blur, or I'm sorry, due to distance from focal point, which was this prong right here. But as you can see, it's still pretty sharp. And again, because we're at 1/60th of a second, so we're still 1/60th, 1/50th in that range. Some of the shots were 1/50th and some weren't. This one here with shake reduction and the bipod was actually 1/25th of a second because some clouds had moved in. At f4.5, now we're at 1/20th of a second for these two, 1/15th down here and 1/13th over here. This is well beyond my ability. As you can see here, we've got some motion blur being introduced without a bipod and without shake reduction to hold a camera steady. With shake reduction, I can still get a fairly reasonable image out of it. Here we can see with the bipod but no shake reduction, it's slightly better than this, but not quite as good as with shake reduction. And here with the shake reduction and the bipod, it's extremely sharp along these vertical lines. It's doing a very good job. So where we're getting our most benefit is using shake reduction in conjunction with the bipod. When we get to f16, it's a slightly different story, as here with the bipod and no shake reduction, we have a substantial sharpness compared to the other samples. And this is what I was expecting to see, but here with the bipod, improved sharpness over no bipod. And here with the bipods, vastly improved sharpness over no bipod. And so what we're seeing is that now these images are 0.6 seconds and 0.5 here, 0.6 here, and 1.3 seconds here. So what we're seeing is that the bipod is, with or without shake reduction, is increasing my ability to have a steady image with here up to 0.6 seconds, but for comparison, with my own, without shake reduction, I can hold an image steady on a 77mm lens up to about 1/50th, 1/30th if I'm really lucky. So we're talking about an advantage here in this sample of about 6 stops, which is fairly significant. Now, so bear in mind you have to use it properly, which means having the ropes taut under your feet and pulling up on them, so having the ropes just a little bit shorter than is required to bring the camera up to eye level. And then keeping your back stiff and your arms locked so that you minimize as much motion as possible. So if you have any questions or comments, please leave those below. I'd be more than happy to answer. If you have any suggestions for other videos, let me know. If I have the knowledge and the technical capability, I'm more than happy to make the video for you. If you have any suggestions, comments, questions, if this video was useful, please leave me a thumbs up. That lets me know I'm on the right track in making videos and content which are useful to you guys. And the last thing I'd like to say is thank you guys for watching. There's some kind of animal in one of those bushes that's making some worrying noises. Oh, it's a squirrel.